Welcome to Aspects of Writing with your host, James Kelly. For the next 60 minutes, we'll explore every aspect of writing, including how to create, format, and even sell your work. The phone lines are open at 731-1230. That's 731-1230. Or toll free, 1-866-820-KLAV. Now, let's get writing. Here's your host, James Kelly.
Hello and welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly. Today we will be talking about writer's block. We will discuss the many ways to stir the creative juices and keep them flowing. My guest for today's show is author Steve Brannon, or he also goes by S.L. Brannon. However, for just a couple minutes, we're going to have a friend of mine who's on the phone calling in from, and we're going to find out where. Kevin, are you online?
I'm here, James. How are you?
Hi, this is Kevin Parsons. Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about where you are now and what you're up to?
We are in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota.
Okay.
And this is State 12
All right.
of our 50 States and 50 Weeks adventure.
All right. We've missed you, Kevin. We haven't heard from you for a few weeks.
Yeah, I screwed up one, to be honest. And then another one, I was nowhere near a signal. I just couldn't get out.
Okay.
So that's been a month at least, hasn't it?
Yeah, and then last week I think you called and I had a different show on.
Right, and so we're meeting every other week. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, no problem.
So
yeah, we've been having a great time, and
good.
I met some really interesting people along the way, So.
Yeah. So where you're in Michigan now, you said, or Minnesota?
Minnesota.
Yeah. Okay. And where are you going from Minnesota?
We're going to go down to Iowa.
Okay.
And so in fact, James, we really dodged the bullet on the weather for a lot of minutes. If you watch the weather, I know Las Vegas has hot weather, but the Midwest has been really hot. But when it just got hot, we went up into North Dakota, and there wasn't hot weather there.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool. And then we've been staying with some friends for a couple of days out on two different lakes in Minnesota.
Okay.
So.
Well,
but now it's hot.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be hot for a little while now.
And Kevin, where can someone go to? You have a blog site, I believe, for 50 states in 50 weeks.
Right. You can go to 50statesin50weeks.com. That's 50statesin50weeks.com. And blogging every day.
Great.
And then one other thing I'm doing, James, I'm not sure if you're aware of that. We are doing 50 stories in 50 states. And once in a while on the blog, I'll publish one of the states.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
Then at the end, and then at the end, we will. I'll publish an ebook, and it'll be 50 stories in 50 states.
Wow, that's cool.
Just 50 short stories, that tie into things we've seen or experienced in the different states.
So a compilation.
I've already done Alaska, and I think it was Wyoming I did back about a month ago.
Uh-huh.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. And then at the end, we're going to write how to plan and succeed in an Uber trip. A long trip.
So you haven't given up on the trip yet, huh?
No, we're still going strong.
Good.
We're having a great time. It's day 79, so we got a long way to go. We've done 12 states, and this is our 12th week.
Wow,
that's
great.
Not always one state per week. California's going to get 2, and Texas gets 2, and North Dakota only got 4 days.
Yeah.
So.
Well, hopefully you'll call in the next show a couple weeks from now, and we can update on where you are then.
Yeah, and I guess I'm kind of living what Benjamin Franklin said. He said, write something worth reading or do something worth writing.
Right, and you're definitely doing something worth writing.
What I'm trying to do is both.
Well, there you go. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Kevin, thank you for calling in and let us know what you're up to, and please call us back on the next Aspects of Writing show.
My pleasure. Thank
All
you, James.
Thank you, Kevin.
Right.
All right. Before I introduce Steve on the phone, we're going to read a few fun facts, and I'm going to read the first one. And the first one is author J.K. Rowling admitted she had experienced writer's block while working on Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Steve, are you online?
Yes, I am. I'm here.
Would you like to take the second one?
I certainly would.
All right.
At the time of beginning her solo career, American singer Gwen Stefani was suffering from writer's block, which then became the theme of her second recording and her single, What You Waiting For? The full-length music video also elaborated on this, starting off with a tired and uninspired Gwen who eventually discovers a flyer advertising help for writer's block.
Yeah, so apparently a lot of people in the industry suffer from it. I know Pearl Jam vocalist Eddie Vedder suffered from writer's block during the recording of Pearl Jam's 2002 album, and he actually banned himself from playing guitar until he came up with more lyrics, and a hidden track of the typewriter sound effects was added to the album that was titled Writer's Block.
And also rapper Eminem suffered from writer's block for some time, as the artist mentioned, and talking to myself. A track on his top-selling album, Recovery. It was one of the causes for his musical hiatus.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into a little bit about what writer's block is and maybe even how to overcome it a little bit. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Aspects of Writing with me, your host, James Kelly, right here on KLAV 1230 on the AM dial in Las Vegas. Or on your computer, you can find us live on the internet at KLAV1230am.com. My guest is author Steve Brannon. As we go along, if you have questions, please call us locally at 702-731-1230. Or if you're out of the area code, you can reach us at 1-866-820-5528. Steve, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we're going to go into a little bit about writer's block. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Okay. Thank you, James.
You're welcome.
I'll start out saying that, of course, that I released my book in October of last year, and plug it real quick here. It's on Amazon.com and Books A Million and Barnes & Noble. Also, it's an ebook format on Kindle.
And the name of your book is The Two Agreements. The
Two Agreements, a good news story for our time. And if you have trouble finding it under Steve Brannon, I actually have it authored under S.L. Brannon.
Right.
The first thoughts for my book came to me in 1988. At that time, I thought, well, okay, I'll get busy writing on this thing. Over the next 5 years, though, it was rather start and stop. I was attempting to not only get my thoughts down and about the topic, and the topic was the Bible theme, and the good news story. And I'd grown up with one particular interpretation of those stories in the Bible and the full length of that and what it was to mean for me. Mm-hmm. But the ideas that I was having, the insights, intuitive thinking is what I call it, gave me a different take on each of those Bible stories and, in fact, the whole theme of the Bible. I was attempting to write those down and get those down as quickly as they were coming to me, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I was going ahead and thinking about an audience. Now, who in the world would read this or even consider it? And also thinking, wow, these are so strange or different from what I'd been hearing in Sunday school that might be called a heretic. So I thought, well, let me get these down and then decide on an audience. For the next 5 years, I was doing a stop and start thing and never did really get a full manuscript put out there. And one thing I realized at that time was that, okay, I'm going to go about living from these concepts and accepting them as my belief system.
So did you say, in a way, you were saying you had a little bit of writer's block along the journey there, it sounded like?
Well, it started right there, just deciding, okay, hey, I'm not getting a full handle on the manuscript itself, just how in depth to go, and capturing these. I was busy capturing these new concepts and wanting to make certain that I had them down in an understandable form. And might say at that time that I hit a wall, but what I did about it was that I decided, okay, I'm going to start living and believing some of these concepts and directing my my spiritual thinking and my spiritual life according to them. And I started that out in the summer of 1994, 1995 kind of time frame. Went another 10 years now, okay?
Yeah.
Talking about some writer's block. Try that on. Yeah. Another 10 years, James, before actually seeing a PBS television special on a Saturday evening. They have a program called Religion and Ethics. I caught the first of two part program on the emergent conversation. I had no idea what that was. It was a group of folk, I found out, were talking about questioning everything about the popular interpretation of the Bible that Christianity had been following for these centuries.
Well, what we're going to do, Steve, we're actually going to go into the second half of the show. We're going to actually go into your book and actually talk quite a bit about it. So what we're going to do, the first part of this book is really just talk about the writer's block itself. And also, when it comes to you, I know a little bit about your background. I know that you you attempted to get I believe, a PhD in theology at Oklahoma State.
Well, at Oklahoma State, I studied, I was in a PhD program for counseling psychology.
Oh, okay. All right.
And studied that for the 2 years, started the dissertation, and realized that that working in a clinical setting really wasn't going to be what I wanted to do.
But what's interesting is that you had that background, and you still had writer's block.
So there you go.
I mean, so you definitely can show how that definitely can happen, no matter what your mental thinking is. So
right.
So we're going to go right into, Steve, about talking about writer's block. And then, like I said, I'd like to spend the last half of the show going over your book and a little bit of mine as well. So I'm going to start off with talking about our topic for today's show is writer's block. And writer's block is a condition primarily associated with writing as a profession in which an author loses the ability to produce new work. The condition varies widely and with intensity. It can be trivial and as simple as in dealing with a task at hand. And the other extreme of that is a blocked writer is unable to work for years on end, like you were talking about, for 10 years. And some have even abandoned their careers. You want to pick up where I left off there, Steve?
Sure. Throughout history, writer's block has been a documented problem. Professionals who have struggled with the affliction include author F. Scott Fitzgerald and pop cultural cartoonist Charles M. Schulz. It can manifest as the affected writer viewing their work as inferior or unsuitable, when in fact it could be the opposite. The research concentrating on this topic abounded in the late 1970s and 1980s. During this time, researchers were influenced by the process and post-process movements and therefore focused specifically on the writer's processes. The condition was first described in 1947 by psychoanalyst Edmund Bergler.
Right, and Irene Clark notes that writer's block is a common affliction that most writers will experience at one time or another. Mike Rose defines writer's block as an inability to begin or continue writing for reasons other than lack of basic skill or commitment. Additionally, the Purdue Online Writing Lab says because writers have various ways of writing, a variety of things can cause a writer to experience anxiety, and sometimes this anxiety leads to writer's block. The literature seems to focus on two areas related to writer's block: causes and potential, cures or invention strategies. Basically what they're saying there is that writer's block can be from a number of things, and we're going to go into a little bit about how you can overcome the writer's block. Steve, would you like to take that next segment?
Yes, I will. Writer's block may have many or several causes. Some are essentially creative problems that originate within an author's work itself. A writer may run out of that inspiration. The writer may be greatly distracted and feel he or she may have something that needs to be done beforehand. A project may be fundamentally misconceived or beyond the author's experience or ability.
Okay, and we're also going to go into, it has been suggested that writer's block is more than just mental. Under stress, a human brain will shift control from the cerebral cortex to the limbic system. The limbic system is associated with the, boy, this is really technical, instinctual process such as fight or flight response. Because the person is primarily thinking to instinctual or learned behaviors, creative processes are hindered. And Steve?
Okay, and the person is often unaware of the change, which may lead them to believe they are creatively blocked. In her 2004 book, the midnight disease, the drive to write, writer's block, and the creative brain, the writer and neurologist Alice W. Flattery has argued that literally creativity is a function of a specific areas of the brain, and that block may be the result of brain activity being disrupted in those areas.
Well, we're going to stop here and talk a little bit about writer's block, and I know I've experienced it on and off throughout my career. I've only published 2 books, but I've been writing since 1981, and what I find interesting is I literally have gone for months as well without writing, and there's a lot of authors out there who will argue with the fact that, well, perhaps you should develop a pattern where you get up every morning. I know there's one author I know named Maxwell Drake. He gets up every day and he forces himself to write for an hour or 2 every morning. There are other people who find other ways of going about, finding a creative way. What is one way you go about it, Steve?
Well, mine is getting myself all piled up on my bed,
okay,
and all my writing materials around, and my computer in my lap, and I have to have a notepad still. I'm one of those that I must have a pen and paper to get the thoughts out when they come quickly. I just can't use that keyboard fast enough.
Yeah.
And get myself quiet. Sometimes I light a candle, and sometimes I have classical music or meditative music playing in the background.
So do you write better with the sound of something in the background or when it's quiet?
It just sort of, if lack of a better word, just whatever mood I'm in. If I'm in a particularly deep, concentrated kind of mood, I don't need the music. It will be distracted. But if I've already have the concept that I'm going to write about, and I'm just going to go about developing it, having something in the background helps.
Okay, because I know what I found helps me is when I go I'll actually go to the back of a restaurant. That actually helps inspire me to write. And I don't know how I'm able to tune all the noise and stuff out, but when I'm at home in total silence, it's very difficult for me to write. And that's kind of odd, but that's just the way I work. So,
well, I can understand that. In my doctorate work, I would go to like a Denny's or a breakfast place like that in the late hours of the night and sit over at a table by myself and be the noise going on in the restaurant. But I could even study for an exam better that way sometimes.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So I understand that.
Well, as far as strategies for coping with writer's block, there are class and group discussions, journals, free writing, brainstorming, clustering, list marketing, and engaging with the text. And Steve, I know you have something you'd like to read about Julia Cameron.
Yes, author Julia Cameron advocates the practice of morning pages as a remedy for writer's block. Now, morning pages are 3 handwritten pages of free writing. For the purpose is to write without the intention of using the writing for anything. It is a practice that can bring your thoughts to the surface and allow you to enter a more creative zone.
So it's no different than a singer warming up by la 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 la.
Yes, sounds like it.
Well, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Aspects of Writing with me, your host, James Kelly, here on KLAV 1230 AM on the dial in Las Vegas. And on your computer, you can find us at KLAV1230am.com. My guest is Steve Brannon, and as we go along, if you have questions, please call us at 702-731-1230, or if you're out of the area code, you can dial 1-866-820-5528. From this point forward, we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to go into a discussion with Stephen about his book. I'd like to. I normally don't do this. We're actually going to discuss his book and mine. I have never discussed my book on the air, but because our books have similarities, even though they really are in a different world all unto themselves, yours is basically based on reality. Mine is total fiction. However, I've incorporated reality. So we're going to start talking about that. And your book, the title is The Two Arguments. Can you give us some idea where that came from?
The Two Agreements.
The Two Agreements.
Yes, I've had people make that difference before too. Well, there are two agreements with the popular interpretation of the Bible. there are two agreements that stand out to me that really made a difference or mark a difference in the history of man. Now, the first one, if we go and take the story of Noah, we have the flood coming in and, of course, wiping out all of civilization. Mm-hmm. And we only have the one family starting civilization over again, being the seed. So that's the first one when God approached Noah and says, hey, I want you to build this ark and put the animals and your family in there. And if you do, I'll save your family. And then after that, he goes and God continues the covenant by giving Noah the okay to eat animal flesh. And at that time, Noah began what is now our modern day, I guess the seed of our modern day religion, going by the Bible theme, mm-hmm. where he gave a sacrifice. So in the new world, in the new civilization that started, that would be, in my interpretation, the beginning of religion. Now, the second one is where the angel visits Mary, mm-hmm. who is the mother of Jesus, and they're through the Holy Ghost, Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit tells Mary, okay, you're going to conceive, be overshadowed by the Holy Spirit, and you're going to bear a child, and his name will be Jesus. And in another gospel it says Emmanuel, which means God with us. And at that point, the era of where law was what ruled the behavior of man through, like, the Ten Commandments coming mm-hmm. down and right. all. That first covenant, first agreement was elaborated on all through the Old Testament stories. But now here we have the dispensation or the new covenant, new agreement being made in grace.
Well, let's just bring up why we're going to be talking about this today. One of the reasons why I want to talk about this today is, first of all, you brought to my attention, and it's in your book, that there's 39,000 Christian religions today.
Yes.
And what we wanted to really talk about was, is there a right or wrong as far as what you believe? Because that's really what your book talks about, is, in belief itself, and not necessarily just Christianity, but really religion as a whole, like who's to say who's wrong and who's to say who's right. And this is why I liked your book very much, by the way.
Okay.
And
go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say, I noticed one of the things you put in the book was that every 500 years there's a great upheaval in the world of civilization. And what did you mean by that?
Phyllis Tickle is actually the author that has identified that, and it's talking about that it's been identified as every 500 years there's been like this rummage sale in Christianity. The first one we know is the Protestant Reformation, and the second one, the Great Schism, and just like so we're due for another now, and it's where just like the whole box gets pitched up in the air and all the pieces go flying out, mm-hmm. and then Christianity goes about putting itself together again. Now, the old is still present. The old structure, as the Catholic Church, is still present in the world, okay. But the Protestant is born, and so a new and a different takeoff is going, and people relate to God differently. There's a new freedom, a new level of freedom given. The rituals are different. Anyway, it's just a large change that comes along. So she identifies that right now we're due for another one of those changes. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned a moment ago the emergent conversation, and that's a group of folk that she identified that were about questioning everything that is in modern-day Christianity. Okay. All the basic tenets they throw on the table and began to discuss them and question them and revisit them and see if too much modernity has come into Christianity.
Well, I noticed one of the things you put in the book was religious seekers today are becoming disillusioned with institutional authority and the idea of absolute truth. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you meant by that?
Yes, most definitely. We have the 20, 30, 40-somethings that I write to and I'm speaking to today, connecting up with through social media, they're all bailing out from under a church that says we've got it all figured out, and this is exactly the way it is. And if that were actually possible, then which one of the 39,000 Christianities would you choose? Which one is right?
Yeah.
So
how can you say which one's right and which one's wrong?
Yeah. So it puts if one group is totally right, has it all patented down, then the other one has to be wrong. Well, these guys and gals know better than that, and a lot of the church rhetoric, the dogmas and doctrines that are put on them, the more don'ts than there are do's.
Right.
And instead of really religion, let me just throw a big umbrella. Religion can too often put too much ritual in there and not enough personal introduction to a spiritual life.
Right.
And that's what these guys and gals want. They want to experience something.
Right. You and I actually had a conversation about this yesterday as well. We were talking about the various churches, and, throughout my life I've attended many different, churches, and I was telling you about one I loved because I called it lazy man's church. Everything was written out for you. The hymn, the prayers, everything. You literally just followed along. And you did touch on that in your book, actually quite a bit, about how when people aren't searching for whatever this is that's created all of us inside, and we also talked about how some people call that, when you say God, they think of a physical being with a beard, and you're actually talking about something beyond that that's almost incomprehensible.
Yes. I believe that this source, call it God, the name that you'd like, that you identify with, but there's one source in my interpretation, and out of that source all of life comes, and we have a yearning as human beings to want to connect to that source. We want to relate to it personally, and we want to feel like that source can relate to us personally. And this is nothing new. It's been, the subject of many publications over the past few decades, that man is hardwired to be religious. Every culture that's been on the planet, folk have gone about their way of connecting to that one source. They realize that there's something that caused all of this to happen, brought all of this about, all of this that we call creation.
Well, and if you think about it, Steve, even just take away Christianity as a whole. You said 39,000 different Christian religions. Religion all over the world, no matter what it is, whatever the belief system is, it's really based on the same premise, that there is a source that created all of us.
Yes. And we're trying to figure it out.
Right.
We're trying to relate to it. We're trying to touch it.
So it's really hard to define, especially with today, as we know with science and everything the way it is. How can you determine who's right or wrong? And one of the things I wanted to bring up was the fact that we talked about this today, as a matter of fact. There's a new, it's called CERN, and there's a group of scientists called CERN outside Geneva, Switzerland, who built the world's largest collider, which is an atom smasher. And it's technically known as the Large Hadron Cauldron, or the LHC. And what it does is it takes particles and it breaks it up so that we can see if they're trying to find out what created existence. And I think it was last week or a couple of weeks ago, they think they found the origin of life. Do you have that information? I know you have it with you. What's your opinion on that?
I am fascinated by this. I have been following it, as a matter of fact, before we talked about it at one point, James, in one of our conversations. I've been following this, and just to be thinking about it. In quantum physics, I have, and mechanics, I've included in my book, because I believe that is truth, and I think this is a time that we don't need to shun science, but science is actually validating what the esoteric religions all over the globe have been saying, and that is that we do come from one source. There is one basic building block to us, and I think that's what they're onto here. But yes, I've been proponent of this and excited about what they were going to find, and heard about the announcement was going to be made, and I was watching it on television on the 4th of July.
So you don't think that this in any way interferes with one's faith or belief or spirituality, or?
Not at all. I think just the opposite. It's validating again these esoteric belief systems that we've had, that we do come from one source, that there's one family here, and that we're made up, and all that we see, whether it be organic, inorganic, is made up of one energy. And I like to call that energy spirit myself.
Right. Well, on my book, and we're going to talk a little bit about my book, and actually we're going to talk about similarities, as odd as it sounds, because mine is fiction and yours is based on, I guess you could say, fact. In my book, I talk about how the spirit and the soul are created, and I talk about how man was created on earth, and I actually talk about the missing link. And I would like to get your opinion on what I've written. I mean, keep in mind it is a fiction, but I actually tell a story about a civilization that came to Earth to really find a new Earth. They were like us in many ways in that they had depleted their Earths, and so they had to seek out a new place. And when they did, they found Earth. There were primates that roamed the Earth. They go back to their civilization to report what they had and found out they were time travelers based on Einstein's theory of relativity. When they came back, because they'd been in space so long, they were losing the ability to breed. So now their new reason for being here was they also had to create a new life form, because in my story, it's the human body or the vessel that we live and communicate through, but the soul and the spirit is an energy force that lives on. And how did you feel about that? Because I know you've read my book.
I tell you what, let me say this first. I believe that you have the plot there for a movie. I really do. I believe someone's, it's time to, James, it's time to start writing the screenplay. Okay?
I actually have the screenplay written.
Oh, listen to this. Okay. Well, I totally agree. I could not put the book down.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, the plot there is that you've brought up, for one thing, I'm just going to say it in grand terms here, that you've picked out and addressed some questions in the minds of man, humanity here, that we have been working to come up with some answers to. Now, you came up with some fictional answers.
Correct.
But still, you brought these questions up, and you gave some very intriguing answers to those. Well, this is, in fact, what this new movement in Christianity is about. It's wanting to have a conversation. It is engaging everyone in a conversation that has faith. And it's saying, hey, let's entertain whatever comes to mind. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. And it may be chaotic. The discussion may be chaotic, and it may be imaginary.
Right.
Even, may be fictional. But let's get the ideas to flowing. Let's do some brainstorming. Let's question everything. Let's don't leave anything out there that's untouched. And say we don't come up with the answer. That's okay. That's okay. It can be chaotic that way too.
Right.
And let's just keep plugging along.
What I was trying to do, though, was actually open people's eyes, because we have war when it's so needless and it makes no sense most of the time. We do have wars over religion, which I think is absolutely absurd, since that's not what the Scripture teaches you. So my idea behind this book was to bring a common ground, and the whole purpose of this was to say, in my book, I actually took liberty to take the Bible and bring in scriptures from the Bible and explain how we are from one being, that we are from God. The only difference is, in my book, God was an alien, and that he is the missing link that created all man on earth. And I actually see in your book, you actually have a part in there about the first couple wanted for nothing, Adam and Eve. These are the creatures that God held up. And I actually could see how that would actually work into my book, in the sense that God created this garden for his to have his soul to be able to interact.
Right. And that's what it's talked about, that the Spirit came, the voice of God came and walked with man in the cool of the evening as part of that story of the Garden of Eden. The thing is that I believe that that first couple was able to see through the eyes of God. Now, of course, in your book, you have separate beings.
Correct.
And where I'm imagining what was going on there was very much in the realm of spiritual, because in my believing here, going along with quantum physics, as a matter of fact, is that we are of that one source. We are of that one energy. So that's actually the case for mankind all the way through. So where some people may be thinking that God is housed in a body, in a human form, and Michelangelo and different ones have gotten our minds going toward that, and people will see a drawing today and say, oh, look, there's a picture of Jesus or a drawing of Jesus. Well, how do we know what Jesus looks like?
Right.
You know? But we are of that one energy, and I think it was fascinating in the story of the beginning that man, in my belief system, actually could see the world as it truly is, and that is spiritual, as one energy. And I don't know what that looks like, but that's what my thinking is.
Yeah. Well, I also talked about a little bit about in my book. I tried to give some understanding of what the spirit and the soul, because so many times when you say the spirit and the soul, a lot of people will can combine those as one. So I tried to give some analogy as to why we're all different, why we all think differently.
I like that. I like that a lot about your book.
And I'll let you say, I would like to hear what your opinion of that is, because, you know, I really do respect your opinion. So.
Well, thank you. Yes, well, I too see that man has spirit, that being the life force in us and that which makes us. And we have a living soul, and that is we're born with a purpose, a willfulness about us. And that's what we go about doing while we're on the planet. Now, the task, as I see it, and talking with everyone, we're all wanting to know, hey, what am I supposed to be doing? What's my purpose? And that's one of the things that I encourage people to go within, and I call it the inner sanctuary. But, yeah, going in there and getting some answers to those kinds of questions, exactly what am I supposed to be doing? And that's one thing I found out about in writing, is that I could express myself and come up with original or some novel concepts and put those out there in the excitement of others saying, hey, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I know you're getting some of that with your book, too.
Oh, yeah.
Though it's fictional, there's some people coming up, and I know myself, I'm saying, whoa, wow, that's awesome to think about the human and the animal being together, and explaining some of the ways that we can do horrific things to one another. And in my book, I express that as separateness, that we are living in this delusional world called civilization, of where we see ourselves or believe ourselves to be separate from one another. So if I strike out and hurt you, then that doesn't do anything to me. It doesn't cause me any harm, but in fact, it really does. We're harming one another.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we even talked. You and I also spoke a little bit about reincarnation today, and one of the things that I brought up in my book, which again is a fictional story, is the fact that in the civilization that created us, they evolved from one primate, and their brain was able to evolve in such a way that every time they were reincarnated or their soul would enter a new body, they were able to recall their past, and so they became a very intelligent and very peaceful society. But when they created the man on Earth, because they experimented with the primates of Earth, each section or colony that they created, as they evolved, they weren't able to recall their past lives. Even though that soul was reincarnated from generation to generation, our brain, because it came from the primate on Earth, hasn't reached that ability to realize who we were. And the problem with that is that we were getting mixed signals, or are getting mixed signals. And I even go into and allude the fact that an example was Hitler, and that how he was actually half Jewish, and yet he crucified basically, or the Jews, and he wasn't blonde hair or blue eyed, but he was trying to create a supreme race. And I allude that that's because he came from a colony when they created us, and that's in the back of his mind, but he can't sort it all out. The brain won't allow him to sort that out. How did you? That's pretty deep. So I'm just wondering, how did you handle that one?
Whoa, well, I'm still pondering. What I read in that, and it makes there's some logic there that I like, and following your thinking in the story. In my understanding here, in writing here, and trying to just reinterpret the popular interpretation, like I said, then where it's okay for us to think ourselves separate from one another and do harm. Actually, if we're living a spiritual life and going into that and getting away from religions where we have the different separate religions, and every way that we can stop seeing ourselves separate from one another and start concentrating on contemplating and meditating on the oneness of all that is. And in doing that, we can see that, okay, we can actually form and shape our will, our soul, and guide it in a direction where we're actually more communal and more spiritual in the way that we're wanting to learn how to love and be supportive of one another, and start letting words like kindness, compassion, forgiveness, and start working and contemplating on those kinds of things and bringing those into everyday life, and bringing into a lot of the conflict that we unnecessarily complicate our lives with.
Well, we also talked about something that, it kind of disturbs me a little bit with organized religion. We were talking about a lady I think I told you this story, I'm not sure. There's a portion in your book where it says, every child in Sunday school learns that on the third day after his death, Christ arose from his grave. This is a key point in the Christian belief that differs it from other religions. Christ is the only ascendant master spiritual teacher who arose from the dead. Also unique to Christianity, Christians' resurrection brought salvation to every soul that had ever lived, and every soul that was alive then, and every soul that will ever live. For Christ defeated the death curse placed on human mankind by participating in death and receiving the resurrection of his body. I want to say this because I think what we can do sometimes with religion is that we can not necessarily over-exaggerate it, but complicate it. And I used to take care of an elderly lady in Atlanta, Georgia, and she was dying of cancer. And we were watching on television about the slaughtering that was going on, I believe it was in Rwanda at that time. And, millions of people were being slaughtered. The bodies were floating down the rivers. And she turned to me and said, do you think they didn't know Christianity, so do you think these people are going to go to hell? And of course, I believe in an all-forgiving God. I don't believe that if you don't have Christianity in your life, if hasn't been introduced in your life, how can you possibly be condemned to hell? And we went to church on Wednesday night, and I thought, well, I'll get the pastor to ease her mind because it really was troubling her. And when I brought that up, he turned to her and he said, that's right, they're all going to go to hell. And I thought, what he did to that woman was unbelievable because, she was suffering inside for the death of these people. And I thought, do we really need to go there, especially when someone is looking at death's door anyway? How do you feel about that?
Well, there's just a real question in my mind about this literal hell. But at the beginning of my book, with that said, at the beginning, very first of my book, first few pages, I began by giving just a very brief comparison of what the popular interpretation and the reinterpretation are. And right there I spell out just immediately that the soul salvation, as we call it, that's addressed in the Bible theme, and I stuck with the Bible theme with that crucifixion story to be able to bring about or fully develop the interpretation, the reinterpretation. But I put in there ever so quickly that if we're one with the source, how can we ever be separated from that source?
I think that's what I'm trying to allude to, is that if indeed, regardless of what our religious beliefs are, if we truly are one, it really shouldn't matter.
Right. And that's where I was saying with that, the reinterpretation of the crucifixion and the resurrection is that there I have Christ bringing and saving every soul that had ever been on the planet, every soul that's on the planet at that time, and every soul to ever be, and that they were all now in his nature and one with the Father. And that's what he kept saying the whole time. When you see me, you see the Father. So he's teaching oneness the whole time. And that's where I put it right in the very front pages of the book. Says, hey, look, this soul salvation thing, it's out of our hands, always has been from the very beginning of however we got here. That source, that God that put us here, we're one. We are one with that energy, right. And we have never been separated. Not a tree, not the planet, not one person from the other. We're not separated from one another or anything, and we're not separated from that source. So this hell and heaven kind of thing, as you can see, that rather gets nixed.
Right.
If you see that the thing is the whole story here is for man to try to get his head and heart focused back on the fact that we do come from that one source, and we're still made of that one source right now. So we're not separated. And when we leave this level of consciousness, then we're just going to go right back to where we came.
Well, one thing you also bring up in the book is that how the whole movement with Christianity right now is going back to the homes as it was literally 2,000 years ago, in that you're seeing a lot of the big churches lose a lot of their followers, and they're actually going into the homes and talking among themselves. Can you give us some reason for that?
Yes. What's happening is our Christianity has been a real head experience. It's been a lot on beliefs. In other words, your neighbor, as a Christian views it, the Christian's neighbor could be as good a person as anyone who walked on the planet, does everything, does so many good works, but may not believe the things that a Christian would believe. So for that reason, he would be judged by Christianity as not a believer and not going to heaven. Mm-hmm. But what people are wanting today is to have an experience. They're wanting to move it from the head to the heart. And that's what this is about getting in homes, is people sitting, looking at one another on the sofa, and if you have a legitimate experience or a very personal experience of how your spiritual life is working for you, then you should be able to sit there and share that with the other person, and they attempt to have the same experience. And one thing that I encourage people to do is to enter a state of stillness, right, and to enter the silence. And people are just way too busy today. But if someone walks away from anything from my book, James, I would really want it to be that they would determine to have a time of meditative silence and contemplation. And I believe that they'll find some answers. I think they'll have some experiences there. But folk are getting together in the home where the heart can be fired up more and can be invited more in, where have human contact and be able to show some of the things I was talking about, compassion, forgiveness, and those things.
Well, one of the things I want to bring up, too, before we go off here is we talked today about December 21st, 2012. And in my book, I allude to the fact that that's actually, I don't consider it a doomsday. I actually consider it a time, because it's a fictional story, of when our ancestors return to help us put our lives together again. What is your take on that?
Oh, I like that. I like that way over the doomsday stuff.
Yeah.
And I agree with that also. That I believe the tough things that we're going through right now that's been building up, the way we have poisoned our home and really putting ourselves into the corner with the ecology, and now with all the civil things going on in the world with our economics, and all around the globe, and just living in such a tentative state on so many fronts, and I could just keep going. But at any rate, I believe, and I like hearing some of these folks talking about that date is going to be a day that is coming to an end, and then there we're going to start getting some answers to these things and start working them out and working together.
Mm-hmm.
And I like thinking about that we have a spiritual help, that we have spiritual guides, we have angels, as such, whatever you might want to define that. But anyway, some answers and some help coming to us and some guidance.
Well, Steve, we're going to have to wrap this up a little bit. I have a few things I need to read before we go off the air. And hold on just a moment. Okay, we have someone who was on the air that says that they were angry about our conversation, and they are Jewish and did not want to hear about religion. But that's what your book is about, so we really, that's what the conversation's about. I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to read a little bit here from the creationstudies.org. The more science look outward using high-powered telescopes to see further and further towards the edge of the universe, the greater the mystery of God and His creation is established. Interestingly, the converse is also true. The more the science peers into the microscope world and beyond into the subatomic particles that form all of that is seen and unseen, it becomes clear that science cannot answer the who questions concerning origins. They are uncertain about the what and how questions as well. Steve Brannon, thank you so much for being on the show. And this is not an opinion for anyone. I mean, this is just a book.
Yes.
We're not forcing religion down anyone's throat by any means. My book is totally fiction. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. And mine is for conversation. I have that all the way through it. It's not to debate religion, and it's not to try to win anyone into religion. It's for conversation, to stimulate conversation. That's what the emergent conversation was. That's why they kept it called a conversation and never wanted it to even be called a movement, much less a church.
Right.
So mine is like yours.
And this show is Aspects of Writing, and Aspects of Writing is about every novel that's out there. We don't, separate one person's opinion from another, whether it be from a dramatic to a comedy to a religious or inspiration or whatever. So that's what this show is all about. This is going to be the last minutes of the show. On our next show, Tuesday, July 31st, we're going to be talking about ebook stores, and internet sales. We will examine the many ways we sell our work and where, and the importance of websites and more. My guest will be authors Dr. Antoinette Smith and Roger DeBlanc, and radio host Nancy Nyes. You can find links and information about all my guests on Aspects of Writing, the Aspects of Writing website at www.aspectsofwriting.com. Aspects of Writing broadcasts live every Tuesday at 2 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time here on KLAV, and on the internet at www.klav1230am.com. Keep in mind we rebroadcast every Wednesday on VegasAllNetRadio.com at 8 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can also view us on video here in the studio at KLAV on YouTube immediately after this broadcast. Just go to YouTube and enter Aspects of Writing with James Kelly. For future air dates and lineups, you can go to your computer and log on to aspectsofwriting.com. Please sign our guestbook while visiting the Aspects of Writing website. You can post questions or comments on our guestbook page as well, or email us directly at aspectsofwriting@yahoo.com. Thank you for listening to Aspects of Writing here on KLAV. This is your host, James Kelly, reminding you, if you can dream it, you can write it.
Thank you for listening to Aspects of Writing here on KLAV. Your host, James Kelly, will bring you an informative look at every aspect of the writing industry. Guests on the show will share their experience and what inspired them to write. Together, we will explore every aspect of writing, including how to create, format, and sell your work. So join us for Aspects of Writing right here on KLAV.